Record on this computer. Good afternoon, everybody. Today we are going to see about vascular injuries and amputations lesson. We are going to discuss about the topic of vascular injuries and amputations. So, polytrauma topic which it has not been covered to you, but actually trauma not only involves upper limbs and lower limbs, it also involves different organs, abdominal injuries, head injuries, and even vascular injuries are also a part of trauma. So, let us look in detail about vascular injuries and amputations. So coming to vascular injuries, that is injuries to the blood vessels, usually they are associated with high energy trauma, and most commonly they are seen in injuries or fractures or dislocations involving elbow and knee joint. And vascular injuries, as the blood vessels are injured, they are associated with shock, and the blood supply to the distal part is compromised. There will be distal gangrene also. So these are all different introduction about vascular injuries. Now coming to the types of injuries, we have open injuries and closed injuries. In open injuries, where it is associated with open fractures and other open lacerations and other wounds, the vessels, you have three types of injuries. First thing is laceration to the vessel. That is directly on the vessel there will be a laceration or cut. And the second thing is AV fistula, arteriovenous fistula, where both artery and vein are injured in close proximity to one another, and there will be blood flow from the high pressure to low pressure, that is from the artery to the vein, and all the local changes in that region lead to the formation of AV fistula. And then the third one is the traumatic false aneurysm or pseudoaneurysm. That is whenever a blood vessel is injured and there will be hemorrhage outside the blood vessel. However, that hemorrhage is contained by the surrounding soft tissues, so creating a false aneurysm. So these are all the three types of open injuries which affect the blood vessels. First is the laceration of the blood vessels, AV fistula, and the third one is the traumatic false aneurysm. Then you have the closed injuries. Here there will not be any open external injury. So usually chances of missing arterial injury or vascular injury are more in case of closed injuries, because in open injuries you have a wound and there will be some bleeding and you will be alerted towards the vascular injury. However, in case of closed injuries, because there is no external open wound, we may tend to miss it. So let us see what the closed injuries are. First thing is external compression. And the second one is arterial spasm, and third one is thrombosis of the vessels following intimal tears. There will be compression, external compression to the blood vessels, either proximal to the flow of the blood, there could be external compression, or whenever there is any injury, there will be arterial spasm, followed by if there is any intimal tear or anything, there will be the process of coagulation will be initiated, and there will be thrombosis in the blood vessels, thereby obstructing the blood flow to the distal parts. So these are the closed injuries. So here pictorially you can see, here I am showing it with my cursor. So here you can see that there is an intimal tear here, following which there could be a thrombus formation occluding the blood flow, thereby disrupting the blood flow to the distal organs or distal parts. And here this is a complete wall discontinuity in the wall over this side. This is one pictorial depiction, and here you can see the aneurysm formation. And here you can see that there is complete transection of the blood vessel, and bleeding is emerging out. And here in the fourth type, you have the arterial spasm, local arterial spasm. So these are pictorial depictions of what we have seen in the earlier slides. And coming to the etiopathogenesis, vascular injuries. Vascular injuries. Coming to the etiopathogenesis, first thing we have external compression. That is sometimes in case of supracondylar fracture of humerus and other things, there could be, we'll apply cast or some bandage is applied here. Suppose if the bandage is very tight, so tight that it occludes the blood vessel and prevents the distal flow of the blood, it can act as tight occlusive bandage leading to the external compression on the vessel. Sometimes the fracture fragments, the bone fracture itself may impinge on the adjacent artery and thereby obstruct the blood flow, causing external compression over the blood vessel. Suppose this is the blood vessel, you can see it here. And then there is a fractured bone impinging on the vessel, thereby occluding the blood vessel externally. One is tight bandages and the second one is compression by fractured or dislocated fragments. And sometimes, as you see in compartment syndrome, there will be increased edema in the compartment. The compartment pressure rises, and as a result, there will be compression on the blood vessels which are passing through that particular compartment. So these are all the different mechanisms of external compression. Coming to the internal occlusion, as we have seen earlier, there will be thrombus formation and arterial spasm. These are the etiopathogenesis. And now coming to the different fractures or different injuries and the arteries involved. Coming to the upper extremity, we have fractured clavicle or first rib affecting the subclavian artery, and anterior dislocation of the shoulder and fractured neck of humerus affecting the axillary artery. And most common supracondylar fracture of humerus in children will affect the brachial artery. And then dislocation of elbow may also affect the brachial artery. So these are the most common arteries involved in different fractures and traumatic conditions of the upper limb. And then coming to the lower extremity, femoral artery may be involved in case of fractured shaft of femur, supracondylar fracture of the femur, knee dislocation, and fractures of the proximal tibia may affect the popliteal artery. And coming to the fracture of distal tibia or fibula, the tibial or peroneal artery may be affected. So these are all the most common arterial injuries which you see in case of different upper limb and lower limb trauma conditions. So now, why should we worry about the vascular injury? First thing, if you neglect a vascular injury or if you miss a vascular injury, first thing there will be hemorrhage leading to shock, and then ultimately it may lead to the death of patient if it is not attended in time. Then there will be ischemia, because once there is a vascular injury, there will not be any distal perfusion to the tissues distal to the area of injury or obstruction. So as a result, there will be ischemia in the distal part. And then compartment syndrome may also take place. This bleeding can, whenever in a closed compartment there is bleeding, there could be increase in the compartment pressures leading to the compartment syndrome. And then tissue necrosis distal to the obstruction or injury. And all these things may lead to amputation and death. So these are all the different consequences of the vascular injury. Hence, one must be very careful about the vascular injury. So whenever a case of trauma comes, whether there is a fracture or not, you have to look for the distal neurovascular status. Peripheral pulses must be examined. Now let us see the different pathological features. Suppose muscles, just like bone, even there will be formation of sequestrum in the muscle. Infarction of muscles leads to the formation of sequestrum. So there will be central, whenever there is a muscle mass, there will be central area of necrosis and surrounding reactive zone, which leads to the fibrosis of the muscle and leads to contracture. All this pathology you must have heard when we were discussing about Vic. So that thus muscles will be affected. And then coming to the nerves, they are more sensitive to ischemia than muscles. So if the ischemia is not relieved, it may lead to irreversible damage of the nerves leading to paralysis. So then coming to the skin, if the ischemia is not relieved within 24 hours, the skin and other surrounding soft tissues also undergo necrosis and there will be sloughing of the tissue. Thus, different parts of the muscles, nerves and skin will also get affected. And coming to the clinical features, First thing, we have hard signs of vascular injury and soft signs of vascular injury. So soft signs of vascular injury, like history of arterial bleeding at the scene, at the accident site or in transit. And then if at all there is any penetrating wound or open wound, which is in proximity to an artery or some neurovascular structures in an upper extremity or lower extremity, that should lead to suspicion of vascular injury. And the third one is a small non-pulsatile hematoma over an artery in an extremity. And the fourth one is some neurological deficit originating from the nerve which is adjacent to the artery, which could be involved. So based on soft signs, we can have the suspicion of vascular injury. Coming to the hard signs, we have the signs of arterial occlusion, which we'll discuss, and then massive expanding hematoma or palpable thrill or audible bruit over the hematoma and massive hemorrhage. These are the hard signs of vascular injury. Coming to the signs of arterial occlusion, first you cannot appreciate the distal pulses very clearly. And then second thing is there will be pallor because of absence of perfusion, and there will be paresthesias and pain. Pain is the first main symptom, which is pain on passive stretching of the muscles. You will have extreme pain in that particular compartment involved. So that pain on passive stretching is the first sign of some vascular injury, followed by paresthesias and paralysis, and other thing is cool extremities because of absence of perfusion. First, the pain is the first sign which we have to be careful, and whenever you have case of any accident, you have to look for the distal pulses and cool extremities and pallor. All these things must be taken care of. Then in any region of arterial injury, there could be a massive and expanding hematoma if there is any vascular injury. And then, as we have seen earlier, there will be palpable thrill or audible bruit for any hematoma. And then sometimes there could be massive hemorrhage externally. So these are all the different clinical features of vascular injury. And then coming to the different investigations, we have arterial pressure index, duplex ultrasonography, or in an emergency center where there is proper equipment, the arteriography can be performed by the surgeon. Otherwise, you have other imaging modalities like CT arteriography or digital subtraction arteriography. Coming to the arterial pressure index, you must have already seen it in case of compartment syndrome. There, it is the ratio of systolic blood pressure of the involved extremity to the uninvolved extremity. If it is less than 90%, if the systolic blood pressure of the involved extremity divided by the systolic blood pressure of the uninvolved extremity is less than 90%, you should have a suspicion of vascular injury. So that is arterial pressure index. They may ask us a 2 marks question, and rest of it are imaging modalities which are used to diagnose any possibility of the peripheral vascular injuries. So here, just for as an example, I am showing it. Here you can see the posterior dislocation of the knee joint. So usually in such type of injuries, the popliteal artery which is passing behind may get affected because of the displaced proximal fragment or distal femur fragment of the distal femur fragment may occlude the popliteal artery. So these are the type of injuries which you must be very conscious. Sometimes what happens is dislocation may get reduced by itself by the time patient comes to the hospital. So you, on seeing the X-ray, you will not find any dislocation or anything, but you have to examine the distal pulses. So here in this X-ray, you can see that there is a cutoff in the flow of popliteal artery here. And then, so this is another crush injury. So vascular injury is most common in road traffic accidents and dislocations. Here you can see the massive crush injury here, and the skin has already become dusky here. And here you can see the X-ray picture, where this is the proximal fragment, this is distal fragment, and these are the comminuted fractures. This is the CT angiography image. there is some discontinuity here in the anterior tibial vessels here, you can see it. So this is just an example. So here we could not appreciate the pulses, then we have ordered a CT angiography. So this is another image of CT angiography where you can see the discontinuity in the tibial vessels. So coming to the management, first immediately you have to control the bleeding. That bleeding can be controlled if the bleeder is small one, you can directly apply thumb pressure and stop the bleeding. Otherwise, external pressure using a good number of bandages and good padding, you have to apply a tight bandaging should be done to control the hemorrhage. However, the use of tourniquet or application of BP cuff proximal to the site of hemorrhage are controversial. Some people, they do not recommend the use of tourniquet because of the fear of further leading to the ischemia of the distal tissues. So the main aim is to control the hemorrhage. And the second one is replace the volume loss, that is to correct the shock. And then we have to cover the wounds to prevent infection and other things. Then whenever you have a dislocation like this, here you have a dislocation. Unless this dislocation is reduced, the pressure on the popliteal artery or other vessels which are lying in the vicinity will not be relieved. So in such cases, you have to reduce the fracture or dislocation first, and then you have to splint it. Support should be provided. So splinting should be given. And then again, for the vascular status, the patient should be re-evaluated. Whenever a patient comes with dislocation or supracondylar fracture of humerus or supracondylar fracture femur or proximal tibia fractures or dislocation of knee, usually in these cases, you have to first check the distal pulses as soon as the patient reaches the hospital. Then after proper initial management, then reduce the fractures or dislocations and once again check for the pulses. If the pulses return, it's okay. Otherwise, they have to be referred to a vascular surgeon and other investigations like CT angiography should be taken up to prevent other disastrous consequences which we have seen earlier. So then shock must be addressed. If there are any open major vessels, they should be explored and repaired. So this is in short about the vascular injuries. This is what is expected from the undergraduate level. So this is all about vascular injuries. Now we are going to look into the amputation. Amputation is nothing but the surgical removal of a part or whole of a limb. And disarticulation means removal of limb through a joint. Amputation is removal of part or whole of a limb, whereas disarticulation means removal of the limb, complete limb, through the joint. So amputations are one of the most ancient surgeries, usually as a result of crush injuries or bullet injuries or blast injuries in warfare. They are the most common causes of amputations earlier. So in early period, the amputations which were done are very crude. They used to cut the limb and then for hemostasis, they used to dip it in the oils or such methods were used in very good olden days, in olden era. And then we have Ambroise Paré who invented the artery forceps, and with further developments in science, good achievement of hemostasis and other stump care, everything has started developing gradually. Now let us look into different indications of amputations. First thing is traumatic conditions like road traffic accidents, crush injuries, blast injuries, and etc. And coming to the vascular conditions, with or without diabetes mellitus, association with diabetes, and then coming to the neoplastic conditions, malignant tumors of the bone. Though recently limb salvage methods have been introduced in the management of malignant tumors of the bone, sometimes when more compartments of the limb are involved by the malignant tumors, or whenever there is involvement of the neurovascular structures because of the neoplastic conditions or malignant conditions, then usually it goes to amputation. And then infective conditions, very bad necrotizing fasciitis or some gas gangrene sort of thing comes, and infections which are not responding to the usual modalities of treatment, all these things they end up in amputations. And some congenital conditions also, when there is no functional limb available, it may also end up in amputations. But the most common causes are traumatic conditions and the vascular conditions, which lead to these are the two conditions which lead to amputations. So here you can see, coming to the indications of amputations, the most common causes are the injury in people less than 50 years and peripheral vascular diseases in case of people more than 50 years. And coming to the less common causes, we have the infection, tumors, congenital anomalies, and other things, as we have discussed just earlier. So coming to the types of amputation. One is Gilliton's amputation, classical amputation, and revision amputation. In Gilliton's amputation, it is done as an emergency and life-saving procedure. Here, the skin flaps are not taken. Once the diseased part is removed, the wound is left open for the either infection to drain or other tissues to heal. It is left open. That is called Gilliton's amputation or a open amputation. Subsequently, when the infection is relieved, then the flaps are raised, the wound is closed, or sometimes it may go up to the proximal level. And the next thing is classical amputation, where it is a planned amputation, and then the flaps are fashioned before the surgery, and then the wound is immediately closed after the ablation of the limb. Usually, Gilliton's amputation is usually done in case of massive crush injuries, where the patient has to get rid of the disease load or this gangrenous or dead tissue as soon as possible, and where the surgical time cannot be prolonged for more time, then we do this Gilliton's amputation, or in case of badly infected things, we do it, and then subsequently as the patient recovers, then the wound is closed. Revision amputation is usually done in case of any complication of the amputations, or if there is any proximal migration of the level of amputation, then we'll go for revision amputation. So these are the different types of amputations. And coming to the levels of amputation, in the upper limb we have the fingers, then there is partial hand amputation, wrist disarticulation, below elbow or transradial amputation, and then there is elbow disarticulation, and then above elbow or transhumeral amputation, and then we have the shoulder disarticulation or forequarter amputation. So these are all the different levels of amputation in the upper limb. And in case of lower limb, we have different levels of foot amputations are there, which we'll see in the next slide. And then we have the ankle disarticulation, below knee amputation, which is the most commonly done amputation, transtibial amputations, and then through the knee or knee disarticulation. And then we have the above knee or transfemoral amputations, and then we have the hip disarticulation, and then we have the hemipelvectomy. So these are all different levels of amputation in the upper limb and lower limb. So coming to the amputations of the foot, we have the transmetatarsal amputations, and then the second one is the amputation at the level of tarsometatarsal joint, which is also called Lisfranc's amputation. And then at the level of mid-tarsal joints, we have the Chopard's amputation. And Pircoff's amputation is one amputation where the anterior part of the calcaneum is removed. Then there is Syme's amputation, where the amputation is done about 0.6 centimeters proximal to the ankle joint. Here you can see the picture of the stump of the Syme's amputation. And now in the picture you can see the stumps of the above elbow and below elbow amputations. So coming to the principles of amputation, one thing which we have to remember is amputation is not an endpoint. By removing the limb, you are not putting a full stop, or it's not an endpoint. It is a new beginning. Because once if the amputation is done properly, if the stump and the wound is good, then good processes are available now for the better rehabilitation of the patient. He can get rid of the diseased or his disease or pathology, and then have a good prosthesis and lead a productive and good life. Good quality of life can be provided to the patient, provided the amputation is done properly. So amputation is a very important surgery. So here the damaged or removed part is removed. And whenever coming to the while addressing the amputations, these are the different structures which are cut. So first, while cutting the bones, we have to leave good stump which is long enough to have a good prosthesis and for good rehabilitation. And one more thing is, shorter the stump, greater is the energy which is spent by the individual for his locomotion. So to optimize the energy consumption, the bone stump which we leave should be long enough for proper energy consumption of the patient, for energy conservation, and then for having a good prosthesis. So that is one thing which we have to keep in mind. The length of the bone that should remain. And then the second one is the muscles. There should be good cushioning. Suppose this is the bone, and here there should be good cushioning for the socket of the prosthesis to have a hold on. So the muscles, the distal soft tissue cover should be good. Distal padding should be good. So the muscles should also be left adequately. And then whenever the muscle is cut, there are two methods. One is myoplasty and the other one is myodisis. Subsequently in the picture, I will show you what it is. And then nerves. Nerves should be retracted, and then cut so that they go inside, they retract into the muscles. If the nerves lie at the because there will be formation of painful neuroma if they are not taken care of. Blood vessels should also be isolated and they should be ligated doubly. And then the skin flaps, they should be tension free. And before doing the amputation, preoperatively, all the medical conditions of the patient should be optimized. That is, their serum albumin levels should be more than 3.5 grams, and then the leukocyte count should be good. The hemoglobin levels should be good when you are closing the amputation stump, because unless those parameters are good, the wound healing will not be good. So then the stump will not be good, and as a result the prosthetic rehabilitation will not be proper. So all the medical conditions, diabetes mellitus and hemoglobin levels, everything should be optimum. It should be proper. So here these are the different steps of below knee amputation. For your understanding sake, I am showing this. So whenever a bone is cut, the ends of the bone should be beveled smoothly. If it is not done smoothly, gradually the sharp ends may tear out and may lead to the wound problems, and even when they are using the prosthesis, it will be painful. So here it should be smooth, the ends should be smooth, the bone ends. And when you are doing a transtibial amputation, the fibula should be cut at least 1 inch, 1.5, 2 inches proximal to the level of tibia cut. That is with respect to the bones. Coming to the flaps, in ischemic limbs, preferably long posterior flap is taken, because there will be more perfusion to the posterior flap here. So when it comes anteriorly, when it is covered, there will be good healing of the stump, and adequate muscle should also be left here so that a proper cushioning will be provided to the stump here. So as we have seen earlier, muscle closure, there are two types. One is myoplasty and second one is myodisis. In myoplasty, this posterior group of muscle is sutured to the anterior group here. That is, the antagonizing group of muscles are sutured to one another. That is called myoplasty. In myodisis, this posterior group of muscles is sutured to the bone here by keeping the drill holes in the bone. So that is myodisis. Myodesis is usually contraindicated in case of ischemic limbs. So these are all different, and the nerve should be pulled distally as much as possible, and then it should be cut so that it will retract deep into the soft tissues, into the muscle, and there will not be formation of a painful neuroma subsequently. So these are all the different precautions which we have to take. And then while closing, also we have to see that the stump, the closure is tension free. If the closure is not tension free, later on grafting or secondary closure can be done. But this wound should not be tensed. I mean, there should be tension free closure of the wound here. So these are all the different precautions which we take during amputations. And coming to the stump and its management. The stump, it is the residual part of the limb which is left after the amputation. Stump is just not an anatomical residue. It should have, it is an active motor organ, because when we put the prosthesis, it is the motor activity of this stump which will move the, which will be helping to move the prosthesis and thereby helping in the rehabilitation. So the stump should be mobilized with muscle strengthening exercises. Once the amputation is done, thing is not over. Suppose if there is below knee amputation done, there should be flexion extension exercises of the hip, of the knee joint. Otherwise, there will be flexion contracture of the stump. Same way, when above knee amputation is also done, good adduction, abduction exercises and of the stump should be done, of the above knee stump should be done. Otherwise, there will be contractures, and once when the wound heals and the process is kept, the rehabilitation will not be proper. So, proper muscle strengthening exercises should be initiated. And as I have told just earlier, the energy required for walking is inversely proportionate to the length of the remaining limb. So if the shorter the stump, greater will be the energy expenditure by the patient. This will be difficult in case of old and debilitated individuals. So keeping in view the disease burden and the energy required for the ambulation, as well as proper prosthetic uptake, proper processes should be kept. So all these three factors should be kept in mind while deciding the level of amputation. And then these are all the different qualities of a good stump. It should be neither too long nor too short. And then it should have a good muscle power with good range of motion at the proximal joint. And the stump should have a healthy and non-adherent scar. And it should be fleshy. The end should be fleshy with no bony spurs. So these are all the, this is how an ideal stump should be. And then the stump care consists of stump bandaging, stump exercises, and stump hygiene. So these are all the three things which we have to take care. So here, coming to the stump bandaging, so to prevent the edema formation, subsequent infection, hematemesis, and other infection, here proper bandaging of the stump should be done. Here you can see the pattern in which the bandaging is being done, and here it is applied across the chest to prevent the slipping of the dressing. It should be tight. So it can be done with an elastic crepe bandage, or sometimes in some, according to some literature, even a POP cast is applied along around the amputation stump to prevent the edema. So by this, the edema will be prevented, the wound healing will be good. So that is the initial stump bandaging. And while using the prosthesis also, proper stump hygiene should be maintained. And now coming to the complications of the amputations, immediate complications, infection, and then ischemia. If the level is not decided properly, there could be further ischemia, and if the vasculature is not proper, there will be further ischemia, sloughing of the surrounding skin, or sometimes there could be secondary hemorrhage following the amputations. And coming to the late complications, there could be a painful neuroma. If the nerve is not pulled distally and cut, if it does not retract proximally into the surrounding muscle tissue, there could be a small swelling at the cut end of the nerve, which leads to the painful neuroma. And the second complication is the phantom limb. That is, the patient perceives some pain and paresthesias in the part which has been cut. May feel that the limb is still present there. So that is the phantom limb sensation. And then contractures. If proper physiotherapy is not initiated, there could be flexion contractures of the proximal joints. And then edema of the stump, shrinkage of the stump, and osteomyelitis of the stump. If at all the periosteum, when we are performing the amputation, if the periosteum is removed excessively, or if there is still ischemia persisting, or if the vasculature is not proper, there will be osteomyelitis of the bone. And if you remember, the type of sequestrum seen in amputation is ring sequestrum. So these are all the different complications. And then secondary hemorrhage, which is one of the immediate complications of the amputations. Due to the spinal anesthesia, there will be some hypotension. When the patient recovers from the anesthesia, then the normal blood pressure will be restored, and as a result, there could be secondary hemorrhage if not properly ligated. Sometimes there could be slipping of the ligature, which is rare. So these are all the reasons for the secondary hemorrhage. And coming to the amputations in children, we have seen certain indications that certain congenital abnormalities, we do amputations of the children, amputations in children. However, the main problem is there will be growth potential of the bone stump. As you see, whenever the epiphysis, the proximal end of the tibia and the distal end of the femur, there will be growth potential. Same way, the distal, the wrist joint and the shoulder joint, there will be growth potential to the patient. Suppose you perform a below-knee amputation in a child, and still there is growth potential in the proximal tibial epiphysis. So there will be increase in length of the limb. As a result, the bone which is present there, it gradually stretches the skin over the stump. So subsequently, revision amputations are required in children. So this is one of the conditions which we have to keep in mind when we are doing amputations in children. And coming to the prosthetic fitting and rehabilitation. Just as I told earlier, amputation is not an endpoint. Treatment of pathology may end there because we are relieving the patient of the diseased part or the burden of the disease. However, rehabilitation involves the prosthetic fitting and proper exercises and rehabilitation will be done. And then prosthesis is nothing but replacement or substitution of a missing or diseased part. Prosthesis is a device which replaces the missing part or diseased part, whereas orthosis is a device that aids the body to make better use of the part for which it is fitted. Orthosis augments the function, prosthesis replaces the missing organ. So this is the main difference between prosthesis and orthosis. Prosthesis and orthosis will be dealt in a separate topic. This is just I am giving an introduction or a few words about for your understanding. And then there are two PG points. Amputations and vascular injuries, it is not much discussed either in your theory exam or in PG entrance exams. However, there is chance of this question being given, and it is also useful in for your practical purposes. Once you become interns, you may have to deal with such cases. So this topic is important in that point of view. Coming to the PG point, as I have told earlier, myodesis is contraindicated in severe ischemia because of the increased risk of wound breakdown. Myodesis is suturing the posterior muscle to the bone. And then whenever you have amputation neuroma, the physiotherapy modality to be preferred is TENS. First preference should be given to the TENS, second preference to the interferential therapy, and the third preference to the ultrasound therapy. So these are this question, the second point is asked in AIIMS May 2012 examination, it is asked. So coming to the take home message, first and foremost important thing is whenever you have a case of trauma, check for the neurovascular status. Even if there is no bony injury, please look for neurovascular status. Many a times a knee dislocation, by the time he reaches the hospital, it would have relocated by itself, or while shifting also it might have it could be relocated. So even though it is relocated, sometimes there could be some arterial spasm persisting there. So you have to check for the pulses whenever a case of knee dislocation or supracondylar fracture of femur comes. Coming to the supracondylar fracture of humerus in children, you have to check for the pulses as well as the distal perfusion. That is capillary refill time. Capillary refill time should also be taken care of. And coming to the and whenever necessary, and then these fractures should be splinted. If at all a patient presents with fracture, it should be reduced and splinted properly. And coming to more about the supracondylar fracture of the humerus, a child if presents with supracondylar fracture humerus, check for the pulses and check for the capillary refill. Then if they are present, it is okay. Otherwise you have to reduce the fracture and then check for the pulses and the peripheral capillary refill. If pulses return, happy. If the pulses do not return, check for the capillary refill. If it is okay, then wait, observe for few hours. If the capillary refill persists and the pulses do not return, or if the capillary refill deteriorates, immediately go for vascular surgeon consultation. Arteriography, I mean angiography should be done, and immediate exploration, and the vessel should be addressed. Otherwise, it may end up in disastrous consequences, which we have seen earlier in the consequences of vascular injury. So, amputation is not an endpoint. That is another important point. Amputation should be done properly. Proper stump care should be seen. The bone end should not be sharp. They should be beveled smooth, and then the muscle cover, the soft tissue cover around the stump should be proper, and then stump hygiene should be properly maintained for successful rehabilitation of the patient. So this is in brief about the vascular injuries and amputations lesson. And then see, if properly done amputation and with proper prosthesis, this disability will not make them enable. So disability is not inability. It is a different ability. So thank you very much. If you have any doubts, you can either type in the chat box, or you can send to the email ID, which I am sending it in the chat box.